Good evening to Madison Avenue, each and every one of you. So glad that you're able to join with us. It's been a few weeks since we've been able to do our Bible study here online. We've had missionaries in and singing groups in and meetings that I've been attending. So anyways, I apologize about the gap in our time here, but looking forward to getting back to our lesson this evening. We're in the fourth lesson of Ezra and Nehemiah, reestablishing the Jewish homeland, and we're still in the book of Ezra. So if you want to go ahead and get your Bibles open and ready, we're going to be in Ezra chapter 6 and 7 this evening. So looking forward to sharing a little bit of this with you this evening, and I hope that you will get a little bit out of the lesson tonight. So let's get started, okay? Ezra chapter number 6 is where we're going to be beginning at tonight, and again we're looking at the idea of Ezra and Nehemiah and the Jewish homeland. Let's remind ourselves a little bit about the end of lesson number 3. In lesson number 3, we finished with talking about how there was a group of people that were trying to stop the process of the building of the temple. And they were doing everything that they could. They had filed a grievance with the king. They had sent lawyers and counselors in to try and handle it and to take care of all of it. And there was a little bit of a rebellion. And they decided, you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start rebuilding anyways. We're going to start doing what God's called us to do, because we don't answer to a king. We don't answer to man. We answer to God. And so because of that, they decided to go ahead and start or restart that building project even without the king's permission. So these men came back up. They said, no, we don't want you building. We're going to petition the king again. And if you remember, that one of the last things we looked at in our last lesson, lesson number 3, was that they sent to the king, they said, king, search the books and you'll see. And if you'll remember, we talked a little bit about how, the king, if he searches the books, he's going to find where they were given some permission, but he's also going to find where they were told that they weren't allowed to anymore. And so the king is going to be searching the books and looking for that. And but God's going to really bless, and God's going to only open up the scroll. God's only going to open up the book with the permission in it. And so that's kind of where we're headed at here in this lesson. So let's look at our first slide together here. In Ezra chapter number 6, we're looking at the decree of Darius, the decree that he sends out and gives to the people of Israel, gives to the Samaritans. And here's what he's going to be talking about in chapter number 6. Darius's decree is covered in verses 1 through 12, okay? And he starts searching the writings in Babylon, as Tatnai had them do in chapter number 5, which is what we just talked about. But Tatnai's purpose was not to encourage the building. His purpose was to stop the building. He wanted to stop the process of building the temple. He wanted to stop the process of the children of Israel getting to have that place all back to themselves. And so he was doing everything he could to stop the process of the building. But God had other plans. God was going to provide everything that they needed. So the writings confirmed a couple of things. And here's the scroll that they rolled out and the scroll that they found. And we can actually see that down here in the Bible verses. It says that there was found at Achmetha, in the place that is the province of the Medes, a roll, and therein a record was thus written. And so we see that this record was written, and in the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king that made the decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem, let the house be built. And so that is the first thing that is found. The house of God was to be built. And there's some other interesting things. If you would continue reading, and again, we're not going to read this all here on this recording this evening, but I encourage you to read it on your own. But if you'll continue reading, you'll find out that one of the other things that is recorded in this scroll, the other thing that's recorded in this book, is that the foundations were to be strongly laid. It means they weren't supposed to just be thrown up and thrown together. They were to be planned out. They were to be done in the right way, in the proper way, so so that if a storm were to come, if another siege were to come, if somebody were to come, that it would not fall down easily. And so they were to be fortified. They were to be strongly laid. Another thing is it's given some detail here that it was to be 60 cubits wide and 60 cubits high. And so we've got some really interesting detail that's given to us in the chapter number 6 here, reaffirming everything that the previous king had written down. We'll also see in the writing it confirmed these 3 things as well. It was to have 3 rows of great stone and a new timber. And so it wasn't supposed to have something that was to be recycled, reused. It was supposed to be of the best that was available. And so brand new timber, brand new stone, 3 rows of it. It was to be really fortified. And all the expense, here's the really neat thing about how God provides. All of the expense of this was to come from the king and his house specifically. The king said, I'm going to be giving this, I'm going to donate it. This is what I feel like God has laid upon my heart. And so it was the king's money. It was the king's goods that was being used to build the temple. And plus everything that Nebuchadnezzar had taken 70 years earlier, everything that he had taken out of the king's house, everything he'd taken out of the temple, everything that he had removed and moved to Babylon, now Darius is saying, you can return it. Take it back with you. Get it out of here. It's not ours. It's yours anyways. And so Darius says you can have it all back. And so that's an amazing blessing that God provided all this, that God is starting to move and work in making sure that Israel is able to go home. So Darius tells Tatnai to leave the Jews alone. He says, stop bothering them, stop writing me, let them build their city. Let them build. Let them do what they want to do. I am giving them permission, and I don't want to hear from you ever again. So Darius decrees that they're allowed to continue to build, and then he makes another really interesting decree there towards the middle of chapter number 6. He makes a really interesting decree. He says this, he says, all the taxes that are collected on that side of the Jordan, on the other side of the river, if anything that I collect that I would normally collect from that side, it's all to be paid to them. And so Darius is really, really not only helping them out to rebuild, but Darius is helping them to reestablish themselves and to continue to grow and continue to build and do what they need to do. And so God is really providing everything, every single thing. God is just working along here. Darius said that their work was not to be hindered. And so he told all of those people, he said, you're not to be hindering it. You're not to stop it. Let them do what they're going to do. I've given them permission. As a matter of fact, not only am I giving them permission, I'm giving them the money to do it. And so if you stop them, it's like you're stopping me. So do not do it. Don't hinder them at all. So Darius also gives them all those things, to all the material they need to build. Darius gives them the decree that they can start collecting all the taxes on that side of the river. And Darius says you're not to be hindered by anybody else. Finish the work that needs to be finished. And then, if that's not all enough, God's still working in the background. God impresses it upon Darius's heart to give them everything that they need for their initial sacrifices. And so the initial sacrifices of the goats and the lambs and the bulls and all of that stuff, where's all that going to come from? Darius gives them all of that as well. And so God literally provided everything. He provided them the money. He provided them the goods. He provided them the bulls, the rams, everything that they needed. All was provided. And yes, you say, well, Darius provided it all. Well, he may have been the human person. He may have been the individual that was in that area. But we all know it was God that orchestrated all of it. It was God's hand that was leading and guiding them. So what an awesome picture that we see here. Well, the second point in chapter number 6 is about the temple being finished and rededicated. The temple is finally going to get to a point where they can start using it. They've finished the building of it, the exterior, the interior. It's ready to start being used. But before you can use it, We're going to dedicate it unto God. This is verses 13 through 18, right in the middle of this chapter. But with Tatnai now out of the way, he's not allowed to hinder them anymore. He's not allowed to get in the way of the building process. The work can finally be finished. What they've started out to do a few years prior, now they're able to finally actually get it done and do what needed to be done. See, when they were allowed to actually work, when they weren't being hindered by their neighbors and their other people that were there in the town, when they weren't being hindered and they were actually able to work, they were actually able to do it very quickly. And so they were able to get everything finished up and done the way that they wanted to, and ultimately the way God wanted them to. So work could finally be finished. As they built, Haggai, Zechariah, they come on the scene and they just start preaching. They start giving them some encouraging words. They start prophesying. They start talking about the Lord. And no doubt this had to be an encouraging thing as they're standing there on the Temple Mount, rebuilding the temple. And here comes the prophets of God preaching and presenting the gospel message. So, and of course, while they're not talking about the individual Jesus, they're not talking using his name, they are talking about the Messiah, which was Jesus. And so it's just some encouraging things as they're continuing to build and finish and dedicate the temple there in Jerusalem. The temple is finished on the third day of Adar. Now, Adar is the last month on the Jewish calendar. It's the final month. To you and I, maybe we would correlate that to our December, but do not correlate it in the same season, all right? The Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar that we use today are completely different, completely different. As a matter of fact, Adar, that final month for the Jews, to you and to I, would fall somewhere the end of February or March, or maybe stretch into the very beginning of April, again, depending upon how all of that sits in the calendar. But that's what you're looking at there, mainly March, whereas the month of Nisan is the first month of the year, and to you and I, that would land somewhere mid-March into April, or even into that first week of May. So you've got that span there between those 2 months. So while we can correlate it and try and understand that it is just as it is their final month, like December is our final month, their final month and our final month do not overlap. They're offset by quite a bit. So Adar would fall mainly in the March area of our calendar. Nisan would fall mainly in the April part of our calendar, okay? So this is when all of this is taken. It's the third day of Adar. They're finishing up the temple, and now they're going to dedicate the temple. And they're not just going to get out and with a bunch of humdrum chants and prayers, and it's not going to be something that's going to be that's going to be negative. It's going to be something full of joy. It's going to be dedicated with joy, with excitement, with praise. They are excited about what God has done for them, and so we're going to see this temple being rededicated with joy. The offerings that they dedicate the temple to the Lord in, the offerings consisted of 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and 12 he-goats. And so the priests were establishing all of this. They were getting everything done, everything set in the way, and they were clearing the way. Not only were they dedicating the temple that was rebuilt, and of course that's what the purpose of this was, but they're also dedicating it and purifying it, clearing the way for them to celebrate Passover in the very next month. So just a short while later, they're going to be celebrating Passover. So they got to make sure that everything's done, everything's set, everything's established, and prepared for the very next month. So that actually leads us to the final point in chapter number 6 here, which is that Passover is going to be celebrated. Passover was a very short 41 days away. And so they had to make sure everything was set, everything was put into place. And so 41 days after the temple is dedicated, after it is finished, Passover was kept for the first time in 70 years. And so they're very excited about this. To start out the ceremony, the priests and the people need to be purified, so they go through a purification process and standard. And then all the people came together and ate of the Passover meal. And they kept the feast for the full 7 days. So it's not like they just, well, let's just rush and get it done, and let's just do it for a weekend. No, that's not what they did. They did it for a full 7 days, and the Bible says that they were filled with joy. So no doubt they were excited about getting back, worshiping God, and holding that Passover meal with their brothers and sisters there at the Jewish holidays. So that leads us into chapter number 7. Now Ezra is going to be sent by the king. Now, this is a long journey, and we're going to look at some of the detail of that in just a moment. But Ezra is going to be sent by the king, and this was not an easy thing to be done. Ezra was going to make this journey, and he was going to go for the specific reason of teaching the people how to reestablish the feasts and the holidays and everything that was in their customs. So let's look at some of the details here in chapter number 7. Beginning with verses 1 through 28, the entire chapter is dealing with Ezra being sent by the king. Okay. Now, of course, we can make the argument Ezra was being sent by God, and most certainly he was. But the physical, the human sending, the physical part where somebody said, okay, Ezra, it's time for you to go. That was done by the king, and the king's the one that sent him out. So let's look at a couple of these details. Letter A. We get some really interesting detail at the beginning of chapter number 7. Let me get my Bible program opened up to the right chapter here. At the beginning of chapter number 7, we get some really interesting detail of all these names. And I know some might say that the names here are boring, it's hard to read, and I get it. It is. It is very difficult to read some of these names, so much so I'm not even going to try to pronounce them, okay? I would butcher 90% of them or more, all right? But the names are important, because it's important to see the detail that the children of Israel had, the detail that they would go into to keep these records and to know exactly where they came from. If we start reading about Ezra, we can learn that Ezra is not just a great-grandson to Aaron, but a 15th great-grandson, a 15th generation down the line to Aaron. And we can go through and we can see all the names that lead us from Ezra, which is right here. I'm going to highlight that for you. You can see Ezra, and we can look at all these different names leading us all the way to the son of Aaron. So this shows us that Ezra had a direct line and a direct link to the high priest Aaron and to Moses. And so this is a direct line showing us there. So again, I know those names can be difficult to read. I know sometimes it can seem boring, but they are very, very important for us to have, okay? Let's continue on and look at a couple other points that are really cool. Verse number 6 tells us that Ezra was a very well-educated man. It says that Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses, which the Lord of Israel had given. And the king granted him all of his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God was upon him. So he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. So he knew it. He knew how to teach it. He knew how to speak it. He knew how to write it. He was a very educated man. So Ezra knew what he was doing. However, and I mentioned this a minute ago, now I'm excited to show some of these details to you. Ezra had a long journey ahead of him to get there to Jerusalem. He had to leave Babylon and go to Jerusalem, and it was a 4-month trip. Now you say, well, why in the world did it take so long? Well, I should have pulled the map up and shown you a map, but I didn't get that up and prepared for you. I'm sorry about that. But anyhow, you'll just have to trust me on some of these figures. You can certainly Google it and look it up for yourself if you'd like. But between Babylon and Jerusalem is right at about 712 miles. All right, so it's a long journey. It's not like it's right around the corner. 712 miles. Even if we were to drive it today, if you were to rent a car in Jerusalem and drive from Jerusalem to the area of Babylon, it'd take you 14 hours. And that's straight driving through. That's not counting having to stop at all the checkpoints and all the border crossings and showing your passport and answering questions. And it'd probably take you the majority of 2 days, to be honest. But if you didn't have any roadblocks, if you didn't have any borders to cross, if you were just driving straight through, it's a 14-hour drive. Now, if you were to go on an airline and you could get a direct flight from Jerusalem to Baghdad, which is just north of the area of Babylon. If you could do that, which you can't really do that, but if you could, it'd be a flight time of about an hour and 40 minutes. So again, you can see this, even in modern day, it's not like it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away. It's not like it's real close. Even by a nonstop flight is a 2-hour flight. So it's a good distance away, but it took Ezra 4 months to travel between Babylon and Jerusalem. And Ezra, the Bible tells us that Ezra had prepared his heart, that he'd prepared his heart not only to teach the people the law of the Lord, because obviously that's going to be the most important thing as they get to where they're going, and these people had not seen the Word of God for a long time. They had not heard it. Maybe they'd heard it from their mom and dad or their grandma and grandpa, or they'd heard it by word of mouth. But to hear a preacher preaching it, to hear a man like Ezra presenting it and teaching it, they had not heard that in a long, long time. And so Ezra had to prepare his heart to teach the people. But beyond teaching the people, Ezra also had to prepare his heart to do the law of the Lord. He had to do it. He had to get out and he had to do and practice what he was going to preach. There's nothing worse in the world than someone that is a hypocrite, someone that is not going to do what they are preaching. And so my suggestion to you is this: if you don't plan on doing something, you certainly have no business preaching about it. You got no business teaching about it. You got no business talking about it. How in the world are you going to tell someone to stop smoking when you got a cigarette hanging out of your mouth? See what I'm saying? And so it's the same way with Ezra. Ezra is saying that he's going to have to teach the people, but if I'm going to teach them, I've got to be willing to do it as well. And so Ezra prepared his heart to teach and to do the law of God. The king gives Ezra all that he needs, and he gives it all to him in peace. He says, Ezra, I love you. I'm appreciative of what you're doing. Here, take these things and go do what needs to be done to worship your God. And so the king gives Ezra things like silver, gold, counselors. He gives him some of his men to go and help him to establish everything. He gives him an offering from the people. And so he's really helping out quite a bit, as a matter of fact. So this is just really interesting here in the middle of chapter number 7 as we get down into verses 18, 19, 20, 21. Some of these different areas we can see that the king is really helping and doing all that he can. All right. All of this was done so that the Jewish people would have the money to buy the offerings that they needed. See, not only did he give them like the initial dedication offering, not only did he give him all of the taxes that are being collected, but then he sends with Ezra all this gold and silver and all these other things so that they could kind of get on their feet, kind of a beginning of things. And so that after the first offerings were made, they'd have more money to buy some more offerings from the people that were around, from the countries and the areas that were around. So, I mean, this God really impressed upon his heart to really take care of Ezra in every way. And getting started and getting established and the initial sacrifice and money for a second and third sacrifice, everything, God gave everything. And ultimately it was all so that it could be turned back in praise to him. So verse number 20 tells us that if they needed more, and here's as good as this king has been to them, here's really his heart. Look what verse 20 says. If you need more, just come back and ask. That's what he says. He says, if you need more, just come back and ask. I'll help you any way that I can. So, man, God really, really worked through the king here. So the king says now in verse number 23, whatsoever God commands you to do, do it. And so the king's kind of giving up on a little bit of that, letting go of some of that control. And Ezra is actually given control to set people in place of leadership. And so Ezra is given that ability. The king says, you go there, you're going to be the leader, you're going to be the one that's controlling things. I need you to set people up, get a government established, get things started, get things going. So Ezra is given that control from the king. Ezra has the ability to now do that and set up that leadership within Israel. The chapter number 7 ends with Ezra thanking God. Isn't that how everything in our lives, everything that we do, shouldn't we always end by thanking God? Thanking God for his mercy, thanking God for his provisions. God had provided everything for the children of Israel here in chapters 6 and 7. And Ezra stops and just says, thank you, God. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for what you've given to me. Thank you for what you've given to our people. And Ezra just took time to thank God for all that had been, all that had happened over those previous days, months, and years. All right, so that brings us to the end of our study tonight. We were just looking at those 2 short chapters. I hope that you enjoyed that. Next week we'll be back. And we'll be in chapters 8, 9, and 10. Next week we're going to be doing 3 chapters, okay? Because we're going to finish the book of Ezra next week with those 3 chapters, and then we will get into Nehemiah. So again, next week, read with me chapters 8, 9, and 10. Be prepared for that as we open up the Word of God next Wednesday night at 7 o'clock as well. I hope that you have a good night, the rest of your night tonight. Have a great rest of your week. If you are well and able to come out, we would love to have you. Our in-person services, we're still doing Sunday morning at 11, Sunday afternoon at 2:30, and Wednesday night at 7. So those are the 3 services that we're offering right now. We still have not restarted Sunday school or children's chapel or the Wednesday night Bible discovery class. There's still some things that they're trying to be patient on, but the in-person services have been restarted Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Wednesday night. So we'd love to have you. We'd love to see you there, okay? God bless you. Have a great day in all that you do. Give God glory. Talk to you and see you later. Bye.